When the big oil guys get taken out like this, is this a screaming buy or what?
I think this is a moment, Alex, where this is basically a consolidate, capitulate in the sector. The companies which have low gearing, their ability to be able to deliver low cash break-evens as basically they manage their dividend, their capex at low oil prices, those are the ones that are going to be most resilient. And they're also the ones that aren't going to abandon ship. The companies that are able to still deliver volume into the medium term, because that's important. As we see the next cycle emerge, you want to be still holding barrels as opposed to having abandoned in order to be able to shut down and sort of defend yourself. So it really has to be resilience on one hand versus super cycle leverage in the sort of mid to longer term perspective.
The problem, though, is that as all this is shaken out, the dividend yields of all these guys have just skyrocketed up. So they have the debt they still need to produce. They still need to spend on capex to keep production afloat. And then they have these enormous dividends that they have to pay. At what point, which companies are at risk for having to go back to the debt market or having some real problems?
Yeah, I think it's a great point. I think the first way to look at it is what are the cash break-evens? I mean, post-dividend, post-capex, what oil price do you need? And that for the sector at the moment is around $50. For BP, it's actually low. They had a more bearish view on oil, so they're positioned a bit more defensively at $45. So if your starting point is $45, and then you cut capex to sustainable levels, and then you basically reduce your OPEX, you're down sort of closer to $35 to $40, which is not too far away from the oil price. Now, in the context of a lower oil price and say that the Saudis continue to squeeze and dump oil into the market, I would expect then BP to sort of revert to more deep pockets in terms of lowering capex further to not just sustained, but even lower than that. But when you think about the question around who's going to blink first from the majors' perspective, it's going to who's going to be able to manage the duration. So if we roll this into next year and all of a sudden we're now in a year's time, oil price hasn't changed, that's the point where I see them regrouping around their capital frameworks and taking a serious look at the dividend and whether it is just too pro-cyclical. I think at that point, the companies most at risk are Repsol, OMV, ENI, companies who have a high cash break-even, who don't have much optionality and don't have much of a strong balance sheet to lean on.
Does this set us up at any point for a supply gap later on if we go at these low prices for a long period of time and they have to retrench capex even further?
Absolutely. I'm glad you asked that because there's sort of a reap what you sow moment in this sector, which is as the majors capitulate on capex, and not just shale oil companies, but all the majors across the world, which is in fact, I think, what the Saudis are trying to do. They're trying to inflict maximum pain within this duration where you see an irreversible dent on capex, on capital frames. If that's the starting point going into the next cycle, what you will then see is supply, which we already forecast peaking within 2 years, just being pushed forward. So there's a sort of a positive corollary from this very dark hour in that ultimately over the medium term you see a lot more production coming off very quickly. And I think to some extent that's what the majors are counting on as they think about a through cycle capital frame and their dividend, which is, well, if we're all cutting capex, that means that everyone's cutting capex, and that means that production from non-OPEC, non-US is going to roll over a lot sooner, and therefore the cost curve comes to bite. But that all depends on the Saudi stance. Do the Saudis continue to roll this out over the next few years, or do they basically inflict maximum pain, see the capitulation, and then come back to the table? We think so.